Okay, welcome back to the final half hour of Green Rush Live. Here we are every Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm always joined by
David Rabinovitz, and we have Walter Sullivan sticking with us. Thanks, Walter. And we've got another guest who's coming on as soon as we get through a few AV issues.
Yeah, he's Andrew Livingston is trying every effort he can to get visual contact with us. And we all know in this whole Zoom universe, we all know that you think it's going to work the same way every time. And then when, of course, it doesn't, it can be a challenge. So Andrew's working really hard on trying to reestablish his visual. And I know that those out there, one way or another, will be able to hear him for sure. And now we get to see him. And now we get to see him. There we go. Andrew, there you are. How are you?
I figured out what the issue was, which was I had Microsoft Teams setting open. And that was also utilizing the video camera, and because that was open, that did things open. So
there you go. Well, welcome to the show, and thank you for that effort. I appreciate that joining us. I feel like I'm talking to someone I've seen or talked to before, because I've talked to many members of your law firm, and I've also seen you speak as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Of course.
So, Andrew, as the Director of Economics and Research, what are your impressions of the CAOA bill? And we've been talking about this now really since we went on the live stream at 4 o'clock. Not a lot of confidence amongst most advocates or even those in our chat room that this will ever see the light of day or even get to the floor of the Senate. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I think that, one, it will be introduced. So it will be in the Senate. Will it get a full floor vote? That's another question. I am excited about COA or COA, however we want to pronounce it or say it, for a few reasons. One, it's a new vehicle for us to talk about, right? We talked about the States Act for many years. We talked about the MORE Act for a year or two. Now we have a new bill to discuss, which integrates different aspects of what we've learned in the past, incorporates some of the abilities for states to, opt in or keep prohibition if they want, while still allowing for interstate commerce. And then on top of that, overlays a lot of the great things associated with opportunity trust funds and providing revenue to communities most negatively impacted by the war on drugs that were integrated into a lot of the MORE Act. So I'm excited about this vehicle for a number of different ways. So the question is this language going to be passed into law this session? And that answer is more than likely no. Mm-hmm. Is this language going to make it into the law in the future? That answer is probably in some regards. Is it still going to be called COAOA? Who knows? We don't really know yet, right? Like, the MORE Act is, even if, let's say, no one sponsors the MORE Act anymore, right? The MORE Act is not dead because the MORE Act has merged and informed new pieces of legislation. So this is another vehicle that may, in time, get scrapped for parts. But what it is still a vehicle that I think will inform what the future of legalization will look like when the politics line up in the right direction for that to actually have a full Senate and full House floor vote and be signed into law.
Wow. Well, that's a great way to look at it. Very optimistically. You did mention that word politics, and Lord knows we're right in the middle of the most divisive Senate we've ever, at least I've seen in many, 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 many moons. And I know that 25% federal tax that's part of this is probably the biggest and the easiest target to point a finger at and say, yikes, we can't handle that. That's just going to feed the legacy market. Is that a way for the politicians to put something that they know they'll never get, so they put it out there so that perhaps they can find middle ground?
So it absolutely could be an initial bargaining chip, right? They know that they're going to have to essentially bargain on the other side with the states, who are going to try to have, what percentage of the tax burden is between states and the federal government, right? And the federal government is coming out potentially with an opening salvo that says, hey, we want a bigger piece of that pie. And the states we're going to have to, lobby with to try to get us down, maybe rather than 25%, and then some other states, usually depends upon between 15 to 25%, although it is 37% in Washington. That being said, like, it can't be 25% at the state level and 25% at the federal level, because nothing is taxed at a 50% rate in that regard, and that's highly problematic. So will the federal government go down to 15 and maybe states will have to push down a little bit? I think so, but from a larger moral perspective, I look at this as the aspect of most of the money that is collected from local cannabis consumers should be taken and reimbursed to the communities to which it is being collected from, right, and those communities that were negatively impacted by the war on drugs. Right. And I think that the state governments are better able to do that, and particularly in some regards, like the most innovative taxes and distribution of tax money in some cases occurs at the local level, whether or not that's like, in Pueblo County, a tax revenue going to local scholarships, or Aurora, Colorado, used millions of dollars in cannabis tax money to create a brand new recreation center. States like Illinois and New York and others are looking at utilizing some of the cannabis tax revenue there to help support their local entrepreneurs, who, small business, social equity applicants, who are looking to essentially try to compete and open up their businesses. And I think that while the federal governments, while the CAOA has a lot of great ideas when it comes to block grants for those local communities and really kind of to additionally support them, I'd much rather have the state collect that money and give it to its local entrepreneurs than the federal government to collect all the money and then disperse it in a way that may be less efficient. So from that standpoint, that's where I see it at. But beyond tax policy, with just the rate, I think the really interesting thing is, one, whether, the fact that this is a tax at the cultivation level and how that impacts existing markets, which at some state level also have taxes at the cultivation level. So how do we compare, for instance, Oregon and California, Oregon, which just has a retail level tax, California, which has both, and what are the competitive advantages and disadvantages there? And then also I find it really interesting to look at how the reduction in the tax rates as it pertains to licensees with the less than $20 million in sales will impact the market organizational structure when it comes to the relative power of cultivators versus extractors and retailers.
Now, I want to make sure that I introduce you to Walter Sullivan, who's a Massachusetts legend in the world of alcohol and cannabis. Is that are you comfortable with that, Walter? I didn't say that.
All I want to say is Mr. LIvingston, I presume.
It's good. It's good to be introduced to you.
And he is a bit of a legend. One of the things that has come up, Andrew, and I bet we are hoping you can shed some light on this. That federal tax that they are talking about, are they planning on taxing the medical marijuana community as well, or just adult use recreational?
From my readings of the summaries of this, it just applies to adult use. But that being said, there may not be the same sort of dichotomy differential, right, between medical and adult use. So if you're going to be making health claims with cannabis, you're going to have to go through the FDA process, right? Mm-hmm. And with that, your whole system of kind of this, quote unquote, medical cannabis is going to be just very different. In state regulatory systems, medical and adult use cannabis can be grown in the exact same location, using the exact same processes, packaged in the exact same way, and sold at the same store counters, just with different tax rates. Right. And that's likely not going to occur in the same regard as it pertains to regulated federal cannabis. And so this is also one of the major sticking points, which is, how do we deal with cannabis that might be saying and making medical claims, but yet hasn't gone through an FDA process? Because just because we're unleashing the shackles of the ONDCP, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and the DEA as the primary regulators federally of what is currently still an illicit product, just because we're switching over to the FDA doesn't mean we don't have people that can shut down a business for what they still view as selling an illicit commodity in a way that does not meet their regulatory burden. And so the question would be, is there going to be a 25% tax on cannabis that is produced by a essentially cannabis pharmaceutical company like GW Pharmaceuticals that's selling a product like that? The answer is no. But the real question is quote unquote medical cannabis as we see it in the states going to flow within what the federal government is seeing as their total lane for cannabis, or flow through a lane that is much more pharmaceuticalized as we're seeing with GW Pharma.
Andrew, you make a great point. I mean, this what's happened with hemp. Oh, great. Hemp is now legal. It's not a controlled substance, but you're still under the FDA. Yes. And we saw what happened. This legislation somewhat tries to convince the FDA to do something to form regulations relative to supplements and so forth, but we're still under the FDA, and that causes a problem.
Yeah. And it's going to be difficult to get beyond the reality that the Federal Food, Drugs, and Cosmetics Act doesn't really allow products to be sold as supplements when the primary ingredient is an active pharmaceutical ingredient in a FDA-approved drug. And so that's the case, at least for CBD. And I don't think it's going to be long until Sativex, GW Pharmaceuticals THC variant, is also FDA approved. And so we're dealing with those situations on how to regulate that. And that, I think, the taxes are the most easy to understand from a news perspective, from reading articles, just from a top level. 25% tax, that's too high. But probably the most consequential issues associated with how the CAOA would transition their regulations is any kind of intermediate buffer period by which cannabis products at the state level can be protected while we determine the ways that the FDA may regulate them federally. And that window of opportunity right now is occurring with hemp. We have a lot of hemp products that are produced legally, are extracted legally, and then it gets a little bit grayer as it comes to their branding, marketing, and sales.
And the development of Delta 8, which, it's pretty amazing to me. I love this community. This is going to be great book. Andrew, I'm going to hope one day you'll write a book about this because,
I actually, we have. The firm has written a book on this. Okay. And I'll make sure to pitch that. I got to pull up the title in a second.
Yeah, please do. Actually, I've read Charlie's book because he's in your book.
Yeah. I'm an author on a handful of chapters, so that's the one I'm referencing.
Yeah, and I love some of these other books that are coming out. Here, this one, I'm going to pull it out just because it's within arm's. This is a book by Matthew Harmon, Marijuana Haters Guide to Making $1 billion from Hemp, the Next Disruptive Industry. And I remember talking to a scholar, if you will, of cannabis when I first started this podcast and interview back in 2018. And I flat out asked him, I go, okay, which of these markets is going to be bigger? Is it going to be the cannabis THC market, or is it going to be the hemp market? And because of the multi-uses of the hemp market, the answer, of course, was the hemp market. We're still scratching the surface because we're still waiting for our federal government to actually come up with some regulations that make sense for the industry. Do you agree with that?
So the hemp market is interesting, right? We currently see the vast majority of hemp in the United States that is still grown for its cannabinoids. Now, obviously, things have shifted a little bit from the crash in 2019 associated with the CBD wholesale prices, but it's still, by and large, the majority of hemp that is grown in the United States is grown for byproducts of its flower. Now, why is that when there's a potentially multi-billion-dollar industry associated with hemp fibers, hemp paper, hemp concrete, hemp, bioplastics, all of these other things, hemp textiles. And the reason that is for a few complex dynamics, which is one, to produce the machines and the facilities to at scale turn hemp into some of these other sorts of products is very expensive, requires a lot of capital investment. And at this time, while there are some of them, there are not that many. And you need a lot of processing to create the sort of input stream that could really like replace the cotton in your socks with hemp. The other issue is that these base commodities, whether or not it's, concretes or fiber products or, rope and all these other things, have a lot of other current production streams and a lot of built logistics infrastructure internationally, let alone even thinking about the fact that many federal governments, whether or not you're in, East Asia or in North Africa with cotton, subsidize these products. And so how is hemp going to compete when we have decades and decades and billions of dollars of built infrastructure in the textile markets in Southeast Asia? And the question is that is a much more difficult market to insert yourself in. Now, when it comes to CBDs, now part of the real reason that, the CBD boom almost took over the hemp boom in some ways when you look at the production of hemp for cannabinoids was that it wasn't replacing a commodity in the same supply stream as hemp would have to do with textiles. So the supplement market, it has a lot, it's a lot easier to kind of play in than these other markets which have long international supply chains. And people knew about the medical benefits of cannabidiol and cannabinoids from all of the news that came out with Charlotte's Web and Charlotte Figi and really CBD for pediatric epilepsy. And then there was a lot of other stories about its palliative benefits and things like that. And so it was ripe for demand in that supplement aisle. And there's enough small retailers which sell supplements across the United States and small grocery stores that you were able to just get on the shelves, right? You just needed to create a product. You could create a product in oil capsule. The machinery wasn't all that complicated, and get it onto the shelves in small ways, right? You can't do that when it's trying to, make socks or make fiber panels for cars. Those supply chains are much more complicated. You're dealing with much, much larger manufacturers. And to get, that product at a competitive rate across the country is much different. Furthermore, supplements are one of the few commodities that you'll see at a supermarket with a small bottle that costs $25, $30. And so it wasn't that weird to see a CBD supplement at that similar price range. If you were to go with like a small hand woven hemp, shirts or socks at like a Target, you'd be looking at your socks for cost of, $10, and you'd be looking at your hemp, your local hand spun hemp socks at a cost of $35, and it just wouldn't really make sense.
Great point.
You mentioned international. There's a news item. We're on a weekly news show that will follow this live stream. And one of the international items that I picked up that I found interesting was the Decree 811 coming out of Colombia, a country that I'm somewhat familiar with from the 70s and 80s, let's just say. Exports, they're going to start exporting. The cost of growing a gram of cannabis in Colombia is 5 cents. In the United States, it's 50 cents to $1. Seems to me, and I didn't do well in economics, that Colombia has an opportunity to impact if they start exporting. Will they be allowed to export into the United States, or no matter what this bill does? And how much of an impact is that going to have on the domestic market and the various states? I mean, it seems to me that could be a huge deal breaker.
So some of this, I think, will depend upon how cannabis gets integrated into free trade agreements.
Right.
Right. It's the question of if it's legal in United States and it's legal for export in Colombia, will the United States basically say, hey, we're not taking any Colombian cannabis? And that, I think, will depend upon how it gets integrated into future free trade agreements.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert on the USMCA and whether or not newly legal commodities get automatically integrated or have to be amended, considering that of the United States, Mexico, and Canada, the United States is still the one without legal cannabis federally. Although, of course, in Mexico, it was passed by the Supreme Court. It has not yet been, regulatory system has not yet been ratified by their legislature.
Right.
So if we're talking about Colombia, right, let's assume that cannabis is coming into the market. Now, first off, if it's medical, it would just come in from the medical side of the system. And we very well could have a US pharmaceutical company do the extraction, do the processing, do the product formulation, utilizing Colombian grown GMP certified cannabis as an active pharmaceutical input ingredient. And that's actually pretty common internationally. And there's a really, really important analog to look at, which is the legal opioid industry, right? So when it comes to drugs, right, we have synthetic opioids like fentanyl is a good example. And we have naturally derived opiate medications like morphine, codeine, things like that. Mm-hmm. And all of those drugs, right, there are legal poppy fields throughout the world. There's a whole lot in France, Turkey, a huge amount in Australia. And there's farmers that grow these legal poppies for the purpose of extraction to be put into legal opiate medicines. And how that occurs is an international supply chain that would be somewhat similar to how cannabis could eventually be integrated internationally into a pharmaceuticalized medical supply stream. Now, that's very different than the straight import of Colombian flower for the purposes of selling it outside of a medical system in a fully adult use style system. How that occurs, I think absolutely will depend upon those price differentials. Wow. But it also just depends upon, how well is it kept? How well is it packaged, right? Cannabis has a shelf life on it. By the time your Colombian cannabis gets to the United States, is it still fresh and delectable? We'll see. There's also a lot of markets similar to that when we look at fresh cut flowers, right? Colombia is actually one of the largest exporters of fresh cut flowers in the world. And, if you can get flowers into the United States from Colombia without wilting, you absolutely could do that with cannabis as well.
Wow. I got to tell you, Andrew, I could listen to you all day. Walter, did you learn anything?
Do you mind if I ask him a question?
No, I want you to. Go ahead.
Andrew, if this federal legislation were to pass, what do you think happens to state cultivators nationally? We have energy costs in New England. How do you think this plays out?
So I think the first thing to think about, and Walter, this is something that I hinted on a little bit earlier when we were chatting, which is what is the impact of differential tax rates at the cultivation level when it comes to state competitiveness? So let's just look at Oregon and California as examples, both prime states for cannabis cultivation export, right? They've got the climate for it. They've got the culture for it. They've got a lot of growers. So Oregon is not taxed at the cultivation level. Currently at the state level, it's just 17% at the retail level, where California has a weight-based excise tax at the cultivation level. That means that if you're an extractor in, let's say, Michigan, looking to buy input cannabis from the West Coast to make into your vape pens, there's going to be a tax differential on the cost of that California cannabis that's not going to occur in the same regard in Oregon. Further than that, you have the issues of just the state-based local regulations, right? California's layers of bureaucracy are going to make that cannabis more expensive to produce than it would be in Oregon, even ignoring the fact that you're going to have seasonal power outages from the failures of Pacific Gas and Electric, and then hopefully not, but potentially wildfires, although that will affect Oregon as well as it will Northern California.
I'm sorry.
No, so I was going to say all of these things will impact itself once you overlay that federal the federal law. Now, as it pertains to cultivators, the CAOA does allow for interstate transport, and I think that could look similar to how the laws are currently being worked out for interstate transport with hemp, which is that a state can ban the sale of hemp, they could ban the production of hemp in its state, but it can't ban the production, can't ban the throughput of hemp, or if the CAOA passes, of cannabis through the state. So, if, let's say, cultivator in Massachusetts wanted to move that cannabis to Missouri and Indiana or Tennessee still prohibited, they'd be fine as long as they transferred it through the state and had essentially authorizations that showed that cannabis was legal commerce. Now, what that looks like for that authorization, I think we still don't know yet.
I think it's, I like looking at other industries. A good one is, years ago, the estate tax, everyone moved to Florida for the estate tax. The federal government dealt with it and said, okay, we're going to put a tax out there to try to level the playing field. So people were still dying in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts was making money. I look at it, in New England, we have taxation isn't our biggest issue generally. Our biggest issue is energy costs and real estate costs. You add taxes to that, it just blows it out of the water. And I think it's going to be very difficult for our cannabis businesses, cultivation located here, to be able to compete because of energy and real estate costs with interstate commerce.
Right.
Walter, did you see the article that came out, I don't know, a month ago, where it was the writer estimates 10% of Massachusetts electricity is now going to marijuana?
Yep.
No, I actually was meeting with a local mayor who has a real issue with cannabis coming in, because what does it do to our grid?
Yeah, I happen to agree with him. Once it becomes federally legal, the Commerce Clause is going to say you can't prohibit it from coming in out of state. Right. So here in Massachusetts, the Cannabis Control Commission is going to have to come up with some regulations to deal with what products can be imported and what's the process of importing them. But once that's done, I said this a few weeks ago, the big winner will be JetBlue, as everybody piles onto those airplanes to go to the West Coast to find much cheaper product.
And we found the same thing in the liquor industry with direct shipping. The states were trying to keep it out. Massachusetts kept passing laws to keep it out, and the federal court kept on overturning it because of the Commerce Clause. Right. The same thing's going to happen in cannabis.
Yep.
Wow.
Fully agree.
Hey guys, I love this kind of talk. Andrew, I'm not kidding you. You were terrific. I really enjoyed talking to you, listening to you. And how do people find you? I know how to find you, obviously, but how do others, if they want to pick your brain or maybe even hire you for consulting, how do people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find us online at VicenteSederberg.com. That's VicenteSederberg.com. And again, you can contact me at Andrew@VicenteSederberg.com. And let me just spell that for you. It's VicenteSederberg. We are probably the largest and most long-running cannabis-focused law firm in the country. And I've been doing this while I'm relatively young. I've been doing this now for about 9 years, working with the firm. And so you can shoot me an email at Andrew@VicenteSederberg, or you can try to contact me on LinkedIn as well. I'm not on social media too much, so an email is best. And I'm happy to chat for an introductory call if someone is interested in being a client. And then hope the opportunity to work with some of the listeners who are listening right now.
Terrific. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out on a Friday afternoon to join us here on Green Rush Live. We really pride ourselves on the quality of guests that we're able to talk to on this program, and you have certainly lived up to that. Walter, on the other hand, well, you know what? We love having Walter on with us.
Jimmy, Andrew, I can't say enough about Andrew. I would just type in Andrew LIvingston in cannabis instead of trying to spell out.
Yeah, you can find me there. I've had enough stuff. Yeah, you type Andrew. There's a lot of Andrew Livingstons, but if you put cannabis, put marijuana, you'll probably find me.
There you go. Well, we appreciate the fact that we did find you and you were able to take some time out. Thank you so much for joining us, Walter. You know we love you. I loved hanging out with you, even on a beautiful summer day. Now go out and enjoy it. David, as always, a pleasure to work with you. Next week, we have a very special guest coming in at 5 o'clock.
Don't tell him.
I'm not going to tell him who it is. I'm not going to tell him who it is. I'm not even going to hold up my little jar. Okay. However, I am going to say it's going to be worth it. It'll be for you to tune in or at least check us out on demand on our 24/7 platform on Roku and Apple Plus TV. So for everybody,
Jimmy,
what?
Before you give the final, how does somebody get in touch with Walter?
Call Jimmy.
Call Jimmy. Okay. That's it. That's good. Now you can go to the wrap up, Jimmy. He had his opportunity. He blew it.
Go ahead, Walter. Walter Sullivan, attorney, Massachusetts. Any vice you have, just at Walter Sullivan, and they're going to find
gambling, drugs, I do it all. Sullivan at waltersullivanlaw.com.
There you go. And David, thank you so much for reminding me to do that. I appreciate that. That's why you do such a good job at what you do. So there you go. And no, I won't tell him who's coming on, but you're going to know who it is. Okay. He's one of the biggest names in cannabis, and he's been here for a long time.
He's going to slip it out. I can tell.
I'm not going to do it.
We got to stop him. Dan, cut off his mic.
I'm not going to do it. But for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media,
movies then.
What's that? Well, yeah. Oh, now you go. Okay. Anyway, for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, remember it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.